There is a clay tablet sitting in a museum in Heraklion, Crete. It is roughly 4,000 years old. It is covered in writing, neat, deliberate symbols pressed into the surface by someone who clearly knew exactly what they were saying. Scholars have studied it for over a century. They can count the symbols, they can group them, they can identify patterns of repetition that almost certainly represent words, but they cannot read a single one. The language behind those symbols has never been identified. The civilization that spoke it vanished so completely that we cannot connect their words to any language spoken anywhere on Earth today or at any point in recorded history. And that tablet is not alone. Across the planet, on clay, on stone, on knotted strings, and on wooden boards carried across open ocean, human beings left behind messages in at least 10 writing systems that no one alive can read. Some of these scripts were used by civilizations of millions. Others survived on a single object. What all of them share is this: someone had something important enough to write down, and we have permanently lost the ability to understand what it was. Start with the oldest, Proto-Elamite. Written in what is now southwestern Iran between approximately 3100 and 2900 BCE, it is one of the earliest writing systems on Earth. It appears at almost exactly the same moment as the earliest Sumerian cuneiform, and in some analyses may actually predate it. Over 1,600 clay tablets have been recovered, primarily from the ancient city of Susa. The symbols are clear. The tablet formatting is consistent. Someone was keeping records, tallying goods, managing an economy sophisticated enough to require written documentation at a time when almost no other civilization on the planet had figured out that writing was even possible. And then, after roughly 2 centuries of use, Proto-Elamite vanished. It was replaced by a later Elamite script that is partially understood, but the earlier system, and whatever language it encodes, has no confirmed connection to anything that followed. There is no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual inscription, no bridge between Proto-Elamite and any known language, alive or dead. Jacob Dahl, a professor of Assyriology at the University of Oxford, has been leading a digital decipherment project since 2012, using high-resolution imaging to study every surviving tablet. In a 2018 interview, Dahl stated that even after years of computational analysis, the underlying language remains completely unidentified. The writing system is real. The language behind it is a ghost. Move forward a few centuries and 600 kilometers east to the floodplain of the Indus River. Between approximately 2600 and 1900 BCE, a civilization of an estimated 5 million people built planned cities with standardized brick sizes, grid street layouts, indoor plumbing, and the most advanced urban drainage systems the ancient world had ever seen. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, names that represent one of the 4 great cradles of human civilization, standing alongside Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China. They left behind over 4,000 inscribed objects: seals, tablets, pottery, copper plates, every one of them carrying symbols from a writing system that has defeated every attempt at decipherment for over 150 years. The Indus Valley script contains somewhere between 400 and 600 distinct symbols, depending on how you count variants. That number is too large for an alphabet, and too small for a fully logographic system like Chinese. It sits in an uncomfortable middle ground that suggests a mixed system, part phonetic, part symbolic, which is exactly the kind of system that requires a bilingual key to unlock. No such key has ever been found. And here is the structural problem that may make decipherment permanently impossible. The average Indus inscription is only 5 symbols long. Some are as short as 1. The longest known example contains only 26 characters. You cannot run meaningful statistical analysis on strings of 5 characters. You cannot identify grammatical structures. You cannot distinguish word boundaries. Every major decipherment in history, Linear B, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Mayan glyphs, relied on either a bilingual text or a corpus, large enough to allow pattern recognition across thousands of examples. The Indus script offers neither. 5 million people, indoor plumbing, standardized weights and measures across a territory larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. And we cannot read a single word they wrote. Some researchers, including linguist Steve Farmer, in a controversial 2004 paper published in the Electronic Journal of Vedic Studies, have argued that the Indus symbols may not represent language at all, that they are instead non-linguistic symbols conveying identity or religious meaning, like heraldic crests. The claim provoked immediate pushback. Iravatham Mahadevan, one of India's foremost epigraphers, responded that the structural patterning of the symbols, their positional regularities and combinatorial constraints, is consistent with linguistic encoding and inconsistent with arbitrary symbolic marking. The debate has never been resolved. The civilization that could settle it dissolved around 1900 BCE, likely due to a combination of climate shift, river course changes, and the drying of the Gagahakra river system. They left their cities standing. They left their writing everywhere, and they took the key with them. Cross the Mediterranean now to the island of Crete, where a different civilization left behind a different unreadable script that carries an even stranger frustration. Linear A. The Minoans used it across Crete and several Aegean islands between approximately 1800 and 1450 BCE. Over 1,400 inscriptions survive on clay tablets, stone vessels, metal objects, and painted pottery. The symbols are clean and consistent. The writing direction is established. Researchers can identify number systems, transaction records, and what appear to be lists of offerings to religious figures. And here is what makes Linear A uniquely maddening. Its descendant, Linear B, was deciphered. In 1952, British architect Michael Ventris cracked Linear B and revealed that it encoded an early form of Greek, Mycenaean Greek, confirming that the Greek-speaking Mycenaeans had adopted and modified the Minoan writing system after conquering Crete around 1450 BCE. Linear B is readable. Linear A uses many of the same symbols. If you apply the Linear B sound values to Linear A characters, you get sequences that do not correspond to Greek. They do not correspond to any known language. The sounds produce words that belong to nothing. The Minoan language itself is what linguists call a language isolate. It has no confirmed relatives, no ancestor, no descendant. It exists in a bubble, connected to nothing before it and nothing after it, except the borrowed shapes of its letters. We can approximate how some of the words may have sounded. We cannot understand what any of them mean. The Minoan civilization, which built the Palace of Knossos, which invented Europe's first paved roads, which produced art of extraordinary sophistication, spoke a language that vanished so completely from the human record that even having the key to a related system cannot unlock it. From the Aegean, travel south and west across the Atlantic to the Gulf Coast of Mexico, to a site called El Cascajal in the state of Veracruz, where a road crew in 1999 pulled a stone block from a gravel quarry that may be the oldest writing in the Americas. The Cascajal block, a serpentine slab, roughly the size of a legal pad, weighing about 12 kilograms, inscribed with 62 symbols arranged in apparent sequences. The symbols include images of insects, corn, and abstract shapes that repeat in patterns consistent with linguistic structure. A 2006 paper in Science by Maria del Carmen Rodriguez Martinez and colleagues argued that the block represents a genuine writing system used by the Olmec civilization around 900 BCE. If correct, it pushes the origin of writing in the Americas back by at least 400 years. But here is the problem that separates the Cascajal block from every other undeciphered script on this list. It is alone. No other example of this writing system has ever been found. Not one. 62 symbols on a single stone, pulled from a construction site with disturbed archaeological context, representing a writing system that either produced thousands of texts that have been destroyed or that existed in a form so perishable, bark paper, painted wood, woven cloth, that nothing else survived the tropical climate of the Gulf Coast. The Olmec built colossal stone heads weighing up to 50 tons. They developed the Mesoamerican calendar, They established trade networks spanning hundreds of kilometers, if they had writing. And this stone suggests they did. The implications rewrite the intellectual history of the Western Hemisphere. But one stone does not provide enough data for decipherment. And without a second example, the Cascajal block remains a message from a civilization that may have been literate for centuries, written in a language we will never read, preserved on the only surface that happened to survive. Cross the Pacific now, 2,700 kilometers from the nearest inhabited land, Easter Island. You know the statues, but behind the statues is something that may be even more important and even less understood. Rongorongo, wooden tablets and staffs inscribed with rows of symbols unlike any other writing system on Earth. The symbols are carved in a pattern called reverse boustrophedon. Each line of text is oriented 180 degrees relative to the line above it. You read a line left to right, then rotate the tablet and read the next line left to right again. No other writing system anywhere on the planet uses this technique. 26 objects bearing Rongorongo text survive today, scattered across museums in Santiago, London, Rome, Vienna, Washington, and Honolulu. The total corpus amounts to roughly 15,000 symbols drawn from a repertoire of about 120 distinct signs, some representing human figures, animals, plants, and geometric shapes. That is enough material, theoretically, for pattern analysis. Multiple researchers have identified structural regularities, including what appear to be paired symbols and formulaic sequences repeated across different tablets. But Rongorongo has a problem that no amount of computational analysis can solve. Every single person who could read it is dead. In 1862 and 1863, Peruvian slave raiders abducted approximately 1,500 Easter Islanders, roughly one-third of the entire population, and transported them to work the guano deposits of the Chincha Islands. Among those taken were the island's entire literate class, the Rongorongo men, the specialists trained to read and compose the tablets. 90% of the abductees died of smallpox and tuberculosis. The few who were eventually repatriated brought the diseases home. By 1877, the island's population had collapsed from several thousand to just 111 people. Not one survivor could read the tablets. French missionary Eugene Héraud, who visited the island in 1864, reported seeing hundreds of Rongorongo tablets in the islanders' houses. By the time serious scholarly interest arrived a decade later, almost all of the tablets had been destroyed, burned as firewood, or lost. What survives today is a fraction of a fraction. Linguist Stephen Roger Fisher proposed a partial decipherment in 1997, suggesting that one tablet, known as the Santiago staff, contains a creation chant with a repetitive structure. His reading has been contested by other researchers who argue the patterns Fisher identified could be coincidental. Thomas Barthel, who spent decades studying the script beginning in the 1950s, classified the symbols and mapped their distribution, but could not produce a translation. The underlying language is presumed to be Old Rapa Nui, the ancestral form of the Polynesian language still spoken on the island. But presumption is not proof, and with 26 objects, no bilingual key, and no living reader, Rongorongo remains the most tantalizing unread script in the Pacific. From an island where illiteracy was imposed by violence, travel to a continent where an entire recording system was dismissed as primitive for centuries because it did not look like writing at all. The Inca hipu, bundles of knotted and colored strings, some containing as many as 2,000 individual chords, used throughout the Inca Empire and for possibly 3,000 years before it. For most of the 20th century, scholars accepted that Xipu recorded only numerical information, census data, tribute tallies, accounting records for an empire of 12 million people, administered without a single sheet of paper. Then in 2003, Gary Urton of Harvard University published Signs of the Inca Hipu, arguing that the system encodes far more than numbers. Urton identified 7 binary choices embedded in each knot: fiber material, spin direction, ply direction, color, knotting direction, knot type, and position. 7 binary variables produce 128 possible values per knot. With 1,200 knots typical on a single hipu, the information capacity is enormous, theoretically exceeding that of most ancient writing systems. Urton proposed that hipu constitute a full three-dimensional writing system capable of encoding narrative language, not just quantities. In 2017, Manny Medrano, then an undergraduate at Harvard working with Urton, matched specific chord patterns on quipu from the Inca Administrative Center of Incahuasi to Spanish colonial census records from the same location. The correlations were statistically significant. Specific chord groupings appeared to correspond to specific social groups recorded in the Spanish documents. It was the closest anyone had come to a bilingual key for quipu in 500 years. But where the Spaniards could have preserved the knowledge, they destroyed it instead. Colonial administrators and Catholic missionaries in the 16th and 17th centuries systematically confiscated and burned quipu across the empire, declaring them instruments of the devil. The quipu kamayuk, the professional hipu readers who maintained the empire's records, were forced to abandon their practice. Within 2 generations, the ability to read hipu had vanished. Over 1,000 hipu survive in museums around the world. If Urton is correct that they encode language, then thousands of narrative documents from an empire governing 12 million people across 4,000 kilometers of South American geography are sitting in museum drawers, readable in principle, waiting for a key that was deliberately destroyed. Return now to the Mediterranean. The island of Cyprus, 1550 to 1050 BCE, Cypro-Minoan. A script clearly descended from Linear A, used across the island during the Late Bronze Age. Fewer than 250 inscriptions survive on clay balls, cylinders, and tablets. The script appears in at least 3 distinct variants, which some researchers believe encode different languages. A multilingual island, using a shared writing system to record communications in tongues that may have no connection to each other. In 2022, a team led by epigrapher Silvia Ferrara at the University of Bologna announced progress on identifying sign patterns within the largest variant, called CM1. Using computational analysis and careful comparison with later Cypriot syllabic script, Ferrara's team proposed phonetic values for several signs. But without knowing what language or languages the script encodes, assigning sound values produces the same result as Linear A. You can approximate pronunciation. You cannot produce meaning. From Cyprus, move east to the ancient city of Byblos in modern Lebanon, where a set of stone and bronze inscriptions have resisted every decipherment attempt since their discovery in the 1920s. The Byblos syllabary, approximately 114 characters, appearing on 10 inscriptions found during excavations by Maurice Dunand between 1928 and 1932. The number of characters suggests a syllabary, a system where each symbol represents a syllable, similar in principle to Japanese katakana or Cherokee sequoia. Multiple researchers have proposed partial decipherments, most recently George Mendenhall in 1985, who suggested the texts are written in an early form of Semitic. But no 2 proposed decipherments agree on the readings, and none has gained scholarly consensus. The Byblos syllabary matters because of where it sits in the timeline of writing. Byblos is the city that gave us the word Bible, from the Greek Byblos, meaning book. It was one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, and a critical node in the transmission of writing from Egypt and Mesopotamia to the Phoenicians, who would go on to create the alphabet that became Greek, Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew. If the Byblos syllabary is an intermediate system, a bridge between hieroglyphic traditions and the alphabetic revolution, then its decipherment could rewrite the history of how the most important technology in human civilization, the alphabet itself, came to exist. And we cannot read it. Move now to the Iberian Peninsula, where the indigenous peoples of pre-Roman Spain left behind a writing system that has been partially, but only partially, cracked. The Iberian script, used across eastern and southern Spain from roughly the 5th to the 1st century BCE. The script itself is largely deciphered. Its characters can be read aloud, but the Iberian language, like Minoan, like Etruscan, like whatever lies behind Proto-Elamite, is an isolate. We can pronounce the words. We have no idea what they mean. Thousands of inscriptions have been found on lead sheets, pottery, coins, and stone monuments. A civilization that traded with the Greeks and Phoenicians, that fought the Carthaginians, that produced art and metalwork of extraordinary quality, and that spoke a language connected to nothing, not Celtic, not Indo-European, not Semitic, not Basque, though that connection has been proposed and largely rejected. And finally, standing at the edge of written history itself, the Vinca symbols, markings found on pottery, figurines, and spindle whorls produced by the Vinca culture of southeastern Europe between approximately 5500 and 4500 BCE. If these are writing, they predate Sumerian cuneiform by nearly 2,000 years and represent the oldest writing system ever discovered. The symbols number in the hundreds. Some recur across multiple sites spanning the Balkans. Some appear in sequences that could represent words. The mainstream archaeological position, stated clearly by most specialists, is that the Vinca symbols are not writing. They are decorative marks, ownership stamps, or religious symbols that lack the systematic structure required to encode language. But researcher Shan Win, in a 1981 analysis, identified recurring combinations and positional patterns that he argued were inconsistent with random decoration and consistent with a proto-writing system. If Win is correct, even partially, then the invention of writing did not happen where we say it did. It did not begin in Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE. It began in the villages of old Europe, more than 2 millennia earlier, among people whose names we have never known, in a language we cannot even guess at. 10 scripts, 5 continents, 12,000 years. And the question that connects every one of them is not whether human beings were capable of extraordinary intellectual achievement before the civilizations we put in textbooks. That question has been answered. The clay tablets prove it. The knotted strings prove it. The reverse Boustrophedon carvings on wood that survived somehow across centuries of Pacific storms prove it. The real question is what we have lost. Not just the words, the knowledge, the histories, the philosophies, the religious traditions, the political arguments, the love letters, the tax complaints. 5 million people in the Indus Valley, writing for 700 years, and we cannot read a single sentence. 12 million people in the Inca Empire, administering the largest state in the Western Hemisphere, with knotted strings that may contain their entire literary tradition, and we burned the key. Every one of these scripts represents a locked room. Inside that room is a voice, a human being, dead for centuries or millennia, who took the time to press a stylus into clay, or carve a symbol into stone, or tie a knot in a specific color of string at a specific angle, because they had something to say. And we are standing outside the door, close enough to hear that someone is speaking, but unable to make out the words. The honest position, the only one the evidence supports, is that the story of human civilization is not the story we have been told. It is not a clean upward line from Mesopotamia to Rome to London to here. It is a vast dark ocean with a few well-lit islands. And the spaces between those islands are not empty. They are full of voices. We just cannot hear them yet. Most people see an undeciphered script in a museum and walk past it, another artifact behind glass. But those symbols are not artifacts. They are unanswered messages. Someone, somewhere, thousands of years ago, looked at the world around them and decided that what they knew was important enough to record, that what they felt was worth preserving, that whoever came after them would want to know. They were right. We do want to know. And the fact that we cannot, that the key was lost or burned or drowned or simply worn away by time, is not a footnote in the history of human achievement. It is the central tragedy of it. If you found that fascinating, subscribe now, because the stories no one tells you are always the ones most worth hearing.